All right, young scholars. This week we are going to focus on some more advanced HTML topics, such as XHTML, XML, and JSON. Within the first 2 weeks, we learned some basic code within HTML. Here we're going to touch on some advanced topics with minimal coding. You don't necessarily have to know this stuff, but it's interesting to see the differences between some of these various topics. So XML stands for Extensible Hypertext Markup Language, a stricter and more XML-based version of HTML. In essence, when you put together HTML and put in your code, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. The web browser is going to try and interpret however your HTML code is laid out and displays whatever it interprets your HTML code to look like. Whereas with XHTML, your code has to be exact. If you make a mistake, it's not going to be interpreted correctly, and you have to go back and figure out your mistake on your own. So that is why XHTML is most commonly used solely by experts. That's why, as mentioned, it's beyond the scope of this course, but important for you guys to realize. So as I mentioned, it's always going to have that doc type at the top. Then it's going to have the XMLMS after the HTML tag. All of the usual tags you'd have in your HTML code are mandatory. However, the various elements always have to be set up a certain way, properly nested, closed, lowercase, and the same with attributes. Whereas with regular HTML, you may not know how to do this. You make a mistake within regular HTML. Okay, should be nested, but they didn't do it nested. We'll interpret it as nested and display it as such. So here's an example of what XHTML code might look like. You have your doc type before the HTML tag. You have the HTML XLMNS, refers to the specific requirements. And within the body, you'd have some content and your title, whatever you decide to name that title. However, within this code, you cannot make a mistake. If you do, the web browser will not interpret it correctly. And there you see the difference compared to regular HTML code. You don't need any of those fancy things with the HTML tag. You could just put in your specific tags as you need them in no particular restrictions. So they're XML conforming when they're viewed, edited, and validated with standard XML tools. That's why we're going to touch on XML and JSON within this lecture, which help us store data or information within a specific file. And then the XHTML allows us, or the web browser at least, to interpret that a little easier. And here are some other important reasons you might want to consider using XHTML. So what is XML? Well, it stands for the Extensible Markup Language. It's used to define customized markup languages, and we're somewhat familiar with it already because we've been using HTML. So the basic idea of XML and JSON is to store data or information. However, it might be a little difficult to understand, but technically XML doesn't do anything. So does that make sense? It stores data like a table. However, it just usually displays it for us. It doesn't really do anything. It's just basically think of it as a notebook. You write things down in it, but other than that, does it have any real purpose? You might have it thrown in a closet somewhere after you use it. So as mentioned, it just stores data, and you'll see examples upcoming of how it does that. So it's the parent language to HTML, which is why they interact with each other. It usually is just used to contain data and not display data. And XML tags are custom. You create them with certain rules, but unlike HTML, which has standardized tags that you must use, XML, you can use whatever you want as long as you follow the few rules. So what are they? Well, the tags can contain letters, numbers, and other categories or characters. They cannot start with those characters, though, such as a punctuation like a semicolon. And they can't start with XML, nor can they contain spaces. So here would be an example of a tag you'd create in XML. You have your employee tag, open employee tag, close employee tag. And within that employee tag, you might have certain types. So you have the type tag, and within it, permanent. You might also have a type temporary or a type, terminated in case they were let go. So the XML is used to carry data. HTML is used to display data. That's why they're a little different and why usually XML will be embedded inside HTML if you need to display the data that's in the XML file. So as mentioned, there's no predefined tags with XML like there is with HTML. You're the one that's inventing or creating the tags when you use HTML to store data. So why use it? Well, it helps us transport data. It's easy to share data with it, and we could use it on different platforms, HTML, JavaScript, etc. And here's some additional reasons you can look through as to why you might want to use XML. So here are specific examples. You could create a list of books, create a list of transactions, create news article headers, etc. So here's some example code of how a full XML file might look. You'd have your XML set up. This is considered the prologue. Then you'd have your root. What is the most important or biggest tag? Think of it as the body within HTML. So that's your root. And you'll notice that all of the tags close just like in HTML with that slash. So within our note, we have a to, and then a from, and then a heading, and then a body. So basically like an email. It's to Tove from John A. It's a reminder, don't forget me this weekend. So you can use HTML tags within XML if you choose. For example, if you wanted to bold certain text, you use the B tag. And if you wanted to italicize certain text, you'd use the I tag. Here's another example. In this example, however, we're using an attribute, which is a date. So we put it inside quotes. So the note date, notice attribute applied to the tag. The tag is note here. And then the value of that attribute is 12/18/1953. And that goes inside quotes. There's certain entity references within XML that you can use. However, these are again beyond the scope of this course that you need to understand or memorize. But for example, if you wanted to use less than, instead of using the less than sign, you'd have to do ampersand LT for less than, and then the semicolon. So if you've used any kind of programming language before, like Java, C++, Python, you'll know that you can put comments in your code in order to display what specifically you're doing to an outside user if they were to read your code. Same thing applies within XML. You do the bracket, the exclamation point, dash, dash, put your comment there, dash, dash, close out the bracket. So as we just showed, each XML has to have a possibility of text, attributes, elements, or any kind of mix of above. So in this example, we have a tag of rate with the text element of $19.99. That's our cost, our rate. So here's a reminder of those naming rules we touched on. Case sensitive, must start with a letter or underscore, cannot start with the letters XML, cannot start with the word XML either. So here's some general ideas. You could take them or leave them with the naming rules. Ideally, you want to create short and simple names, create descriptive names. If you want to have something that describes information, you need to have the correct rule or name to it. If you have first name, you're not going to assign the tag, clothing. It doesn't make sense. Now, in order to embed an XML file into HTML, we use XLink. Again, beyond the course requirements or specifics, but here's how you would embed information within a HTML document if you chose using XLink. So as I mentioned, the reason people like XML is you can use it with other specific files, programs, coding, HTML, JavaScript, and PHP among the most common. So XSLT, Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformations, associates more with CSS, which we'll cover over the next 3 weeks. Here's another example of how XML might look. You'll notice here that the XML tag can be similar to the HTML tag. However, it cannot be used for any of the other tags. So we have an address book here, and within each of the address, we simply have a name and an email for 2 different individuals. So now we hop into discussing JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Basically, it's used when we have data that we want to take something out of or retrieve. And obviously, it associates with JavaScript and Java based on the fact that it is JavaScript Object Notation. So there are some similarities and differences between the two. So JSON is also hierarchical. It's also human readable. And they can also be retrieved using HTTP, the request within HTML. The difference is there's no tags, it's much shorter, and JSON can basically use whatever you can use with Java or JavaScript. So arrays and parsing information, and it also is easier to add to, aka read and write. So here's an example. You're going to have a car object. So now we have to give it the notation. The O, remember, is object. The N is notation. So we have a make, a model, and a price for our car. So the make is going to be a string. What is the make of the car? The model is going to be a string. What is the model? And the price is going to be a numeric value. How much did the car cost? So here's an example of how that would look in XML. You have your car tag to open and close. You have a make tag, in this example, Chevrolet. You have a model tag, in this example, the Subaru, or the Suburban, rather. And then the price example, in this example, 60,000. But then in JSON, you simply have make in quotes, colon, Chevrolet in quotes, comma, model in quotes, colon, Suburban in quotes, comma, price in quotes, colon, 60,000. Numerical values do not need to be in quotes within JSON. And you'll notice instead of tags, we just have an open and close with the brackets. So just like with certain Java, there are data types: string, number, objects, arrays, booleans, which is true or false, and null value, which is there's nothing there. You'll notice everything goes in quotes except for numerical values. So here's some specifics again beyond the scope of the course, but the main purpose of what JSON is used for: to retrieve information from within an HTML file. So in this example, we might want to retrieve my first name, last name, and age. Obviously, that's not my real age, from an HTML file. Next is parsing, which is similar. We retrieve certain information or add the information to the HTML file. In this example, we have the name John, the birth date, and the city added to our variable text. Then our variable object parses the text. So now we have it in this, well, this text, John, birthday, city, is now stored in this variable object. So now we go in and we find the birthday from that object, and we set it to this now object.birth, just like you would see in Java. And now our document.getElementById, we've now added that birthday into our HTML file. So now that 12/14/1986 has been added into our document. The same thing can apply with Stringify, where we add together all the text in one specific file. So now we've turned this JavaScript object into John, who's 30, in New York City. And we add that all into a file. So here is an example of how you'd embed JSON into a specific HTML file. You'd set the division ID, car JSON. You'd also do the same for the car XML. And here's how it would visually look. JSON always uses functions, just like JavaScript would. XML can use functions as well. And then in order to show them, you just do function show JSON, show XML. But you'll notice again that the JSON code is much shorter than the XML code. So here's how you would embed JSON in HTML using a table. And if you were to copy this right-hand side or this left-hand side and then paste the right-hand side below it in your WYSIWYG, you'd end up creating a table that looks like this. We simply have our setup where it's retrieving all of the JSON data within our specific object we create here. Then we create our table border and we insert all of that text from that file. So if you decided you want to learn more, there's a JSON community that goes more in depth into the files or topics regarding this. So again, the purpose of JSON and XML is to basically store data, and you have to use HTML to display it. So he inputted that information into a table using JSON to make it look more advanced. And you'll see this code again produces that table there that you see. So just to test your knowledge on JSON and XML a little, I have you do this in-class example. You do it on your own, obviously, just to see if you kind of understand what you should be doing there. So you might want to use slides 19, 21, 30, 34, and 35 as your guide. You're going to create a book list file in both XML and JSON, meaning they're two different files. One would be books.html and one would be books.json. You're going to include in your data storage files title of the book, author of the book, and price of the book. So go ahead and try that out, see what you do. And then after you decide that you had enough, you've tried, you click on the examples I've provided here, XML book list, JSON book list, and see how specifically they should look. And that's all for today. The next 3 weeks, we will be covering cascading style sheets, or CSS, which allowed us to make our HTML files a little more pretty.